The grandfather clock struck 9:47 p.m., its chime reverberating through the opulent Upper West Side apartment. Outside, Manhattan buzzed with life, but inside the heavy silence was shattered by Anna's voice, sharp and trembling. "You've always wanted the truth, haven't you, Elia? Well, here it is." Elia froze mid-laugh, her wineglass slipping from her fingers. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound ricocheting like a gunshot. Alexei shot up from his chair, knocking it over in his haste. His face was a mask of terror. "Anna, don't do this," Alexei pleaded, his voice hoarse. "Oh, we're long past that point," Anna said, her tone icy and final. She stood at the head of the dining table, a half-empty glass of Bordeaux in her hand. Her dark eyes glinted with the fire of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Elia demanded, her voice rising in panic. Anna turned to her daughter, her expression softening for just a moment before hardening again. "I didn't plan to ruin this night," she said, her voice calm, almost serene. "But your father, my darling husband, always said, better to rip off the Band-Aid. So here it is." Alexei's voice broke as he reached out a hand. "Anna, please." "Shut up, Alexei," Anna snapped. "You've had your say for years. Now it's my turn." Elia's eyes darted between her mother and her husband. "What the hell are you talking about? What does Alexei have to do with this?" Anna let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Everything. He has everything to do with it. Because while you were planning this perfect little family of yours, Alexei and I," she paused, savoring the horror spreading across Elia's face, "were doing more than just talking." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Elia stumbled backward, her hand clutching her chest. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not true. You're lying." "Am I?" Anna challenged, her voice rising. She turned to Alexei. "Tell her, Alexei. Tell your precious wife how you spent her birthday last year in my bed." "Anna, stop," Alexei shouted, his voice cracking. Elia's knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the table for support. "Alexei," she choked out, her voice trembling. "Is it true?" Alexei faltered, tears streaming down his face. "Elia, say it," she screamed, her voice shattering under the weight of betrayal. "Yes," Alexei finally roared. "Yes, it's true. But it wasn't supposed to mean anything. Didn't mean anything?" Anna cut in, her voice venomous. "You begged me, Alexei. Begged me to leave everything behind for you. You said I was the only one who ever truly understood you." "Stop it," Elia screamed, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Both of you, just stop." But Anna wasn't finished. "You want to know the best part, Elia? The real kicker? While you were pouring every ounce of love into a man who didn't deserve it, he was sneaking around with me. In your house, on your couch, in your bed." Elia staggered back, gasping for air as if Anna's words had physically struck her. "You're lying," she whimpered, her voice breaking. "You're lying." Anna's eyes gleamed with cold fury. "Am I? Go ahead. Ask him. Ask him where he was the night you were in the hospital with Grace." Elia turned to Alexei, her eyes wild. "Tell me she's lying. Tell me she's lying." Alexei collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, over and over, like a broken record. Elia let out a guttural scream, grabbing the nearest thing, a candlestick, and hurling it at the wall. The crash was deafening, and for a moment, the room was silent except for her ragged breathing. "You destroyed everything," she sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Anna. "You're my mother. How could you do this to me?" Anna stood unflinching, her expression unreadable. "Because I was tired of being invisible," she said simply, "and because I wanted you to see the truth, even if it destroyed you." Elia collapsed onto the floor, a sobbing mess. Alexei knelt beside her, reaching out, but she shoved him away. "Get out," she hissed through her tears. "Both of you. Get out of my house and never come back." "Don't be melodramatic, Elia," Anna said coolly, draining the last of her wine. This house isn't yours. It never was. It's mine, just like Alexei always was. She set the glass down with a deliberate click, picked up her coat, and walked out the door without a backward glance. The clock struck 10 p.m. as the apartment fell silent, the shattered pieces of their lives scattered across the room like the fragments of broken glass on the floor. But the chaos had only just begun. The door slammed shut behind Anna, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The faint hum of the city below was the only sound, muffled by the thick windows of the apartment. Elia sat on the floor, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts as Alexei hovered uselessly nearby, his hands shaking. "Elia," Alexei said softly, daring to reach for her again. "Don't touch me," she screamed, scooting back as if his very presence burned her skin. "Don't you dare come near me." "Elia, please," Alexei begged, tears streaking his face. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything." "Shut up," she shrieked, her voice raw and jagged. "You think you can say that after what I just heard? After what she said? My own mother?" Alexei froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Elia pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. "How long?" she demanded, her voice quieter but no less dangerous. "How long has this been going on?" Alexei hesitated, and that pause was damning. "How long?" she repeated, her words dripping venom. 3 years, Alexei admitted finally, his voice barely audible. Elia's legs gave out, and she collapsed back into the chair she had been sitting in earlier. The room seemed to spin around her, her world collapsing piece by piece. 3 years, she whispered to herself, her hands clutching at the tablecloth as if it could somehow anchor her. 3 years, and I never knew. God, I'm so stupid. "You're not stupid," Alexei said desperately. I'm the one who messed up, Elia. Please, you have to believe me." Elia's laugh was hollow, almost maniacal. "Believe you? Believe you? You just admitted to sleeping with my mother for 3 years, Alexei. What part of this nightmare makes you think I'll ever believe anything you say again?" Alexei stepped back, his face crumpling under the weight of her words. "I'll do anything to fix this," he whispered. "Fix this?" Elia repeated, her voice rising again. "You can't fix this. Do you even hear yourself?" Her phone buzzed on the table, startling them both. Elia grabbed it instinctively, her shaking hands fumbling with the screen. It was a text message from Anna. "You'll thank me one day. The truth always sets us free." "Mom," Elia let out a guttural scream and hurled the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a crack and fell to the floor. "That woman is insane," she hissed, her chest heaving. "Elia," Alexei said softly, cautiously stepping closer. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've ruined everything, but I need you to know. I never stopped loving you." Elia's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "You don't get to say that to me. Not after this. Not after what you've done." The doorbell rang, cutting through the tense air like a knife. "Who the hell is that?" Elia muttered, brushing past Alexei to answer it. She yanked the door open, her heart sinking as soon as she saw who was standing there. Dad. Standing in the hallway, her father, Richard, looked older than she remembered. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there was a haunted look in his eyes. He glanced past her into the apartment, his face hardening when he saw Alexei. "I thought you'd need me," Richard said simply, his deep voice calm but strained. Elia stared at him in shock. How did you know?" Richard sighed. "Anna called me," he admitted, his expression darkening. "She said it was time I came clean too." Elia's stomach churned. "What do you mean came clean?" Richard stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He looked at Alexei with barely concealed disgust before turning back to his daughter. "Elia, there's something you need to know about your mother and me." "Not now, Dad," Elia snapped, her voice trembling. "I can't handle another confession tonight." But Richard wasn't backing down. "You need to hear this," he insisted. Anna isn't just your mother, Elia. He faltered, his hands shaking as he struggled to find the words. She's what? Elia demanded, her voice cracking. Richard let out a shuddering breath. She's the reason I left. The reason I walked out on you and your brother all those years ago. It wasn't because of the divorce, Elia. It was because I caught her with Alexei? Elia interrupted, her voice hollow. Richard blinked in surprise. What? No. He shook his head. It was with someone else. Someone younger. Elia's knees buckled again, but this time she didn't sit down. She grabbed the back of a chair, her knuckles white. You're telling me this now? I didn't know you'd end up married to someone like Alexei, Richard said, his voice tinged with regret. I thought, he shook his head. I thought she'd changed. Elia let out a bitter laugh. Changed? Changed? She's ruined everything, Dad. And now you're here. What? To drop another bomb on me? Richard looked down, his silence answer enough. Alexei cleared his throat. Maybe I should go, he said quietly, stepping toward the door. Elia spun on him, her voice sharp as a blade. You're not going anywhere. Not until I decide what happens next. For the first time that night, Alexei looked afraid, not for himself, but for her, and for the storm she was about to unleash. The silence in the apartment stretched thin, vibrating with unspoken truths and jagged tension. Elia stood between her father and her husband, her head spinning from the weight of their confessions. Richard's revelation lingered in the air like smoke, choking her. I don't even know who I'm angrier with, Elia muttered, her voice barely audible. You, she pointed at Alexei. Or you, she jabbed a finger at her father. What the hell is wrong with this family? Elia, Richard began, his voice soft, pleading, I didn't come here to hurt you. I came to help. Help? Elia snapped, her laughter bitter. You think this is helping? Dropping some half-baked explanation about why you abandoned us when I was a kid? Why didn't you tell me then? Why didn't you fight for us? Richard's shoulders sagged, the years of regret etched into every line of his face. Because your mother made it impossible, he said. She was manipulative, Elia. I stayed quiet because she threatened to destroy what little relationship I had left with you and your brother. Elia's lip curled. And yet, she still managed to do that all on her own, didn't she? Alexei shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should. Don't you dare, Elia hissed, spinning toward him. You're the last person who gets to maybe anything right now. The weight of her fury was almost unbearable, and Alexei dropped his gaze, his hands clenched at his sides. Mom called you, Elia said suddenly, looking back at Richard. She wanted you here. Why? Richard hesitated. Because she's not done yet. Elia blinked. What the hell does that mean? She told me she was going to tell you everything tonight, Richard said grimly. But I guess she only got halfway through her plan. What else could there possibly be to tell? Elia's voice cracked, teetering between rage and despair. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping. It's about Alexei. Elia froze. What about Alexei? I don't know how to say this delicately, Richard began, glancing briefly at Alexei, but Anna wasn't his first indiscretion. What? Elia whispered, her chest tightening. It's not true, Alexei said quickly, stepping forward. Elia, don't listen to him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about, Richard said, his tone sharp now. Do you want me to tell her, Alexei? Or would you like the honor? Elia's eyes darted between them, her heart pounding in her chest. Someone start talking. Right now. Richard crossed his arms. Let's see. Where should I begin? Maybe with your sister, Lena? The room seemed to shift, the walls closing in around Elia. No, she whispered. No, that's not. She turned to Alexei, her voice rising. Tell me he's lying. Alexei's silence was damning. Oh my God, Elia gasped, backing away from him. You slept with Lena? It was before we were married. Alexei blurted out, his voice desperate. It was a mistake, a stupid, Meaningless mistake. Meaningless? Richard scoffed. I'm sure Lena would disagree, especially after she disappeared to Europe for a year because of you. What does that even mean? Elia demanded, her voice trembling. Richard hesitated, glancing at Alexei. You really don't know? Don't, Alexei warned, his voice low and dangerous. Richard ignored him. She got pregnant, Elia. The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air out of her lungs. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's not true. That's not possible. Alexei tried to reach for her, but she flinched away, her eyes blazing with fury. Don't touch me. Elia, please, Alexei begged. It was years ago. It didn't mean anything. And she didn't keep it. You ruined my relationship with my mother, Elia hissed, tears streaming down her face. You destroyed my family, and now you're telling me you did the same thing to Lena? How many lives do you plan to wreck, Alexei? I never meant for any of this to happen, Alexei said, his voice breaking. I love you, Elia. You have to believe me. Believe you, she repeated, her laughter hollow. You've done nothing but lie to me since the day we met. Elia, Richard interjected softly, his hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do this alone. You can walk away. But Elia shook her head, her fury giving way to cold resolve. No, she said quietly. I'm not walking away. Not yet. Richard frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying, Elia said, her gaze locking onto Alexei, that he doesn't get to walk away from this scot-free. If I'm going down, I'm taking him with me. Elia, don't, Richard began, but she silenced him with a glare. No, Dad, she said firmly. You don't get to tell me what to do. Not anymore. I'm done being the victim. She turned back to Alexei, her jaw set. You're going to pay for what you've done, Alexei, and I'm going to make sure of it. The storm was far from over. With every layer of deceit peeled back, the tangle of betrayal grew messier, threatening to engulf them all. And Elia was just getting started. Elia stared at Alexei, her gaze as unyielding as the ice forming in her veins. The man she once believed was her partner, her rock, now stood exposed, a web of lies and betrayals woven around him. Her father lingered by the doorway, his expression conflicted. What are you going to do, Elia? Alexei asked, his voice trembling. Elia tilted her head, her lips curling into a bitter smile. What am I going to do? Oh, Alexei, she said softly, her voice laced with venom. I'm going to make you wish you'd never met me. Alexei took a step back, fear flashing in his eyes. Please, Elia. Don't what? She snapped, cutting him off. Don't destroy your life the way you've destroyed mine. Don't expose every sordid little secret you've been hiding. Don't worry, Alexei. I won't hurt you physically. Her smile widened. Your reputation, though? That's another story. Richard cleared his throat. Elia, I know you're angry. Angry, she interrupted, rounding on him. Angry doesn't begin to cover it, Dad. I'm furious. Betrayed. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I finally see everything for what it is. Richard sighed, his expression heavy. I'm not saying you don't have a right to feel this way. You do. But don't let this destroy you. Destroy me? Elia barked out a laugh. You're wrong, Dad. This isn't going to destroy me. It's going to free me. She grabbed her phone from where it had landed after her earlier outburst. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. She opened her messages and found Lena's number. Elia, what are you doing? Alexei asked, his voice panicked. Elia didn't answer. Her fingers flew across the screen as she typed. We need to talk. Now, I know about you and Alexei. 20 minutes later, Lena arrived at the apartment. Her face was pale, her expression guarded. What's going on? She asked as soon as the door closed behind her. Elia crossed her arms, her gaze steady. I know, Lena. Lena stiffened. Know what? Don't play dumb, Elia snapped. I know about you and Alexei. I know about the affair. And I know about the pregnancy. Lena's face crumpled, and she sank into a chair. I didn't want you to find out like this, she said softly. Why? Elia demanded, her voice breaking. Why would you do this to me? Lena looked up, her eyes filled with tears. Because I was stupid, Elia. I was young and insecure, and Alexei, she trailed off, shaking her head. He made me feel special. Special? Elia spat. You're my sister, Lena. My sister. And you slept with my husband. I didn't know you two would end up together, Lena said, her voice cracking. It was years before you even met him. And I ended it as soon as I found out you were serious about him. Elia's laughter was cold and sharp. Oh, how noble of you. Lena flinched, but she didn't defend herself. Richard, who had been standing silently by the wall, finally spoke. Lena, does Anna know about this? Lena nodded slowly. She found out. Years ago. She was furious, but she promised she wouldn't tell Elia. Of course she knew, Elia muttered. Why wouldn't she? It's all just a sick game to her, isn't it? Elia, Lena said softly, her eyes pleading, I'm so sorry. I wish I could take it all back. But you can't, Elia snapped. And now I'm left with the wreckage. Lena hesitated, then stood. If there's anything I can do, there isn't, Elia said coldly. You've done enough. Lena nodded, tears streaming down her face, and left without another word. As the door clicked shut, Alexei stepped forward. Elia, I don't, she interrupted, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Just don't. Elia, Richard said softly, you can't let this consume you. I've seen what it does to people. Elia turned to him, her eyes blazing. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you abandoned us. Richard looked away, his guilt written across his face. Elia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. You can both leave now. I need time to think. Alexei hesitated. Elia, get out, she said, her voice low and deadly. Richard nodded and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. If you need me, I'll be here, he said before walking out. Alexei lingered for a moment longer, his face a mask of anguish, before following Richard out the door. The apartment was finally silent again, but Elia's mind was anything but quiet. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was another text from Anna. You're stronger than you think. Call me when you're ready. Mom, Elia stared at the message, her anger bubbling over once more. She hurled the phone across the room, watching it smash against the wall. Ready, she muttered to herself, her voice shaking. I'll show you ready. As the clock struck midnight, Elia made a vow. She would uncover every last secret, expose every lie, and make them all pay for what they'd done. The morning light filtered through the curtains of Elia's apartment, casting long shadows across the chaos of the previous night. Shattered glass sparkled on the floor, a stark reminder of the upheaval her life had become. But Elia wasn't broken. Not yet. She stood in the middle of the room, her phone replaced, her resolve steeled. Anna had always been the puppet master, and now it was Elia's turn to pull the strings. Her plan began with a single call, to her mother. The phone rang twice before Anna answered, her voice smooth and unbothered. I wondered when you'd call. Save the smugness, Mom, Elia said, her tone icy. I want answers. Now. Of course, Anna said. Come to the house. We'll talk. By noon, Elia stood outside her mother's brownstone on the Upper East Side. The air was crisp, and the city seemed to hum with a rhythm that mocked her turmoil. She rang the doorbell, and Anna answered almost immediately, dressed impeccably as always, a glass of wine already in hand. Elia, Anna greeted her with a faint smile, stepping aside to let her in. Don't pretend this is a casual visit, Elia said, brushing past her. Sit. Start talking. Anna's smile faded as she took a seat on the pristine white couch. What do you want to know? Everything, Elia said, crossing her arms. Start with Alexei. Anna sighed, swirling her wine. It began 3 years ago, as I said. He came to me, vulnerable and desperate. He told me you were distant. Stop right there, Elia cut her off. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. I'm not, Anna said, raising a hand. I'm just telling you what he said. And yes, I was wrong to let it happen. But, Elia, I was lonely too. Your father left me for another woman. Because you cheated on him first. Elia shouted, her voice breaking. Do you ever take responsibility for anything? Anna's composure cracked, her face tightening. You think I wanted this life? To be abandoned, blamed for everything, hated by my own daughter? You made this life, Elia spat. And now you're dragging me into it. Anna set her glass down, her hands trembling slightly. I told you the truth because you deserve to know. That's more than anyone ever did for me. Don't try to make this noble, Elia said, her voice quieter now but no less sharp. Anna hesitated, then leaned forward. There's something else you need to know. Elia's stomach churned. What now? Anna's eyes locked onto hers. Alexei didn't just have an affair with me. He had others. Women you'll never know about. And one of them left him a parting gift. What are you talking about? Anna picked up a manila envelope from the coffee table and handed it to her. Open it. Elia ripped the envelope open, her hands shaking. Inside were photographs, Alexei, with a woman she didn't recognize, holding a toddler. That's his son, Anna said softly. Elia stared at the images, her vision blurring as her chest tightened. No, she whispered. Yes, Anna said. The woman came to me months ago, desperate for help. Alexei refused to acknowledge the child, and she wanted someone to hold him accountable. I didn't know how to tell you. Elia dropped the photos onto the floor, her entire body trembling. You knew, she whispered. You knew this whole time, and you still slept with him. You still let me marry him. Anna stood, reaching for her. Elia, please, don't touch me. Elia shouted, backing away. You're a monster. Both of you. Anna's face crumpled, and for the first time, Elia saw genuine regret in her mother's eyes. I just wanted to protect you, Anna said. Protect me? Elia laughed bitterly. You've destroyed me. Elia stormed out of the house, her mind racing. She needed to confront Alexei, to end this once and for all. When she arrived at the apartment, Alexei was sitting on the couch, his face pale and drawn. He looked up as she entered, his eyes widening at her fury. Elia, don't, she snapped, throwing the photographs at him. Explain this. Alexei's face turned white as he picked up the photos. Elia, don't you dare try to explain, she hissed. You're done, Alexei. We're done. Elia, I'm sorry, he said, tears streaming down his face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You never mean anything, do you? She said, her voice shaking with rage. You just destroy everything you touch. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Alexei said, falling to his knees. It's too late, Elia said coldly. You don't get to come back from this. The divorce papers were filed the next day. Elia moved out of the apartment and into a friend's spare room, determined to start over. Weeks later, she sat alone in a coffee shop, a steaming cup in front of her. Her phone buzzed with a new message from her father. Proud of you. Call me when you're ready to talk. Dad, Elia set the phone down and stared out the window, watching the city move around her. She had lost so much. Her husband, her mother, her trust. But she had gained something too. Herself. And for the first time in years, she felt free. Weeks turned into months, but the echoes of betrayal clung to Elia like a shadow. She spent her days piecing her life back together, one step at a time. Therapy sessions, long talks with trusted friends, and quiet moments of reflection became her new normal. Yet, the wounds were far from healed. The fallout from Alexei's lies and Anna's manipulations had left her world unrecognizable. But Elia was determined not to let the past define her future. It was a chilly morning in March when Elia received a letter in the mail. It was from Lena. She almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. The envelope contained a single handwritten note. Dear Elia, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something. Please, give me one chance to make things right. Meet me at Riverside Park, near the fountain, Tomorrow at noon. Lena, Elia crumpled the note in her hand, her anger simmering. But beneath the fury was a flicker of something else, hope. The next day, she arrived at the park, her arms crossed tightly against the cold. Lena was already there, sitting on a bench by the fountain. She looked nervous, her hands twisting in her lap. "Thank you for coming," Lena said softly as Elia approached. "Say what you need to say," Elia replied, her voice sharp. Lena took a deep breath. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did was selfish, cruel, and unforgivable. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you as my sister." Elia's jaw tightened. "You have a funny way of showing it." Lena nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I was jealous of you, Elia. You've always been so strong, so capable. And I was weak. I let my insecurities ruin everything. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Elia snapped. "No," Lena admitted. "But I need you to hear this. I'm not the same person I was back then. I'm trying to be better, and I want to earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life." Elia stared at her sister, searching her face for any sign of deceit. For the first time in years, she saw sincerity. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," Elia said finally, "but I'm willing to try. For now." Lena's shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Meanwhile, Alexei's life had crumbled spectacularly. Word of his infidelity and secret child had spread through their social circles like wildfire, leaving him ostracized and alone. One evening, Elia received a call from a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Elia, it's me." Alexei's voice came through the line, hoarse and broken. "What do you want?" she asked coldly. I wanted to apologize." "For everything," he said. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm trying to change." Elia's grip on the phone tightened. "It's too late for that, Alexei." "I know," he said softly. I needed to say it." She hung up without another word, feeling no satisfaction, only a hollow ache. Elia's relationship with her father had begun to heal in small, tentative steps. Richard made good on his promise to be there for her, and for the first time in years, they started to rebuild their bond. "I'm proud of you," Richard told her over lunch one afternoon. "You've been through hell, and you've come out stronger." "I don't feel strong," Elia admitted, stirring her coffee. "That's because you haven't seen the full picture yet," he said with a smile. "But you will." As spring blossomed, so did Elia's resolve to move forward. She joined a writing group, pouring her pain and experiences into short stories. To her surprise, the group encouraged her to submit her work to a local magazine. Months later, she held a copy of the magazine in her hands, her story printed on the front page. The title, "The Tangled Web," her words resonated with readers, sparking conversations about betrayal, resilience, and the power of starting over. It was cathartic, but more than that, it was a new beginning. One evening, as she walked home from a reading event, her phone buzzed with a message. "I read your story. It's incredible." "Lena," Elia smiled faintly, tucking the phone back into her pocket. By the time summer rolled around, Elia had carved out a life she could be proud of. She wasn't the same person who had crumbled under the weight of her mother's confession months ago. She was stronger, more self-assured, and ready to face whatever came next. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer controlled her. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Elia stood on her balcony, a glass of wine in hand. She raised it in a silent toast, not to the pain or the betrayal, but to the woman she was becoming. "To me," she whispered, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled.